still continue and so on, right? And of course it will be more accurate than anything else. Allah says, from the beginning of time, He established 12 months, and out of them there are four that are sacred and so on, right? So other countries, there was also the Egyptian calendar, the old Egypt, before the Islamic times and so on, even before the Christian times. And then later on, when the Romans occupied Egypt, they implemented a calendar there, which became different than the Julian calendar, and also, of course, different than the Gregorian calendar. So they are following, and perhaps the Copts in Egypt are following a different calendar and so on. In fact, their Christmas is a different time than you have in the Gregorian calendar. And other parts of Japan had their own calendar and so on. Other parts of the world had their own calendars. So this is something that only became forced upon the Gregorian calendar. Only became forced upon the world because of the dominance of the West. Any other questions?
This date of 25th December which they claim is the Christmas and all that. Wow, how did that come about? Was it from Pope Gregory or was it later on?
This is, of course, another matter, not exactly, although it's related to the calendar in some way, but just related to a particular celebration of the Christians. When did this start? It started in for many years after Isa alayhi salam. The followers of Isa alayhi salam were persecuted by the Romans. The Romans were pagans, idol worshippers, and they did not tolerate the followers of Isa alayhi salam. They were very hostile towards the Jews, or Bani Israel, who were there under their rule in Palestine and other places. But the Jews were allowed to exist and allowed to have their own religious, whatever they are following and so on. But when Isa alayhi salam came, and then his people started to follow him and so on, they found that these were a greater threat to them than the other Jews. So they were persecuted, and so they had to be in hiding for a long period of time under Roman rule in Palestine, in fact all over the Western world, all over Europe and so on. They had to be in hiding. After 300 years, there were two Roman emperors, or generals really, army generals, who were rivals to each other, and they were fighting against each other. Eventually, Constantine, one of the generals, he won, and he became the emperor of Rome, Constantine. And so Constantinople is named after him, right? Constantinople. So that city was called after him. He won with the help of the Christians. He said that he had a dream, he saw the cross and that sort of thing, and that he's going to win by means of this. So he enlisted the help of the Christians and so on, and he was able to defeat the other general, and he came to power. So when he came to power, the Christians were by that time 300 years after Isa alayhi salam. They were split up into many different factions, but in particular there were two. There was the main faction that are called the Aryans. Now this has nothing to do with the Aryan languages and so on, right? Sanskrit and Latin and so on belong to that. This is different. Just because the name of the one person was Arius, there was this. The followers of Arius, they were all monotheists. They believed in one God. They did not believe that Isa alayhi salam was God. So up to that point in time, there were still monotheists among the Christians. But the Trinitarian doctrine had spread throughout also. There were many, many people who were following that. And so you had the bishops who were Unitarians and the bishops who were Trinitarians. And they were rivals to each other. So Constantine wanted to settle that. He called a council, which is known as the First Council of Nicaea, in the year 325. Of course, they were not numbering the years according to the birth of Isa alayhi salam up to that time. It was the Roman calendar, the Julian calendar, that was being implemented up to that time. So he called this council, so including all the bishops of all the different factions of Christianity, and they came together to discuss the uniting and so on, and they could not agree on doctrine. They could not agree. What is reported is that the council broke up without any agreement, and everybody was going back to their own homes. And Constantine decided to call back some of them. He did not call all of them. He called back, it seems that he called only the Trinitarians from among them. And when the Trinitarians came and they decided on the matter that the Trinity is the correct doctrine, and they also decided that the 25th of December is the birth of Jesus. That is when we are going to celebrate it. Easter, or the beginning of spring, that is the time of the crucifixion of Jesus. This is the time for our celebration, and some other doctrines, some other things they decided on, including the 4 Gospels. Before that, there were hundreds of Gospels, right? And they decided they will only take 4 Gospels, which agreed with their doctrines, the Trinitarian doctrines, and so on. So from that time, the 25th of December began to be celebrated as the birth of Isa alayhi salam. But there was absolutely no historical proof of that. There's no historical proof of the date when Isa alayhi salam was born. So, now, we'll take this as the last question. I don't want to prolong it.
Is the first of Muharram, is the first day Prophet to start Hijrah?
No, he did not start his Hijrah then. He started the Hijrah in Rabi al-Awwal. That is when, all of the books of Sirah and so on, Hadith, they record the start of the Hijrah of the Prophet from the beginning of Rabi al-Awwal. Maybe the first, I'm not sure. I think it is the first of Rabi al-Awwal. And he arrived in Medina on the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal.
How did they decide in Muharram?
I think that was always so, even in the Jahili days, right? Muharram was considered the first of the year, the first month of the year. And so that continued. But the year in which the Hijrah was done by the Prophet ﷺ, that became year 1. Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.